The world needs more subways, metros, and rapid transit generally. The ability to get across a city like London or Sao Paulo or Delhi quickly and with zero emissions is such an innovative idea that it really hasn't changed that much in nearly a century. In fact, it's been nearly 150 years since the original lines of what would form the London Underground first opened. But with more demand than ever before for clean, efficient, rapid transit, as well as new requirements that sadly weren't a major consideration when underground and elevated rapid transit was first in its heyday, such as full accessibility, and new problems emerged such as the ballooning cost of building subways and rapid transit, we desperately need to think differently about how we build the often underground railway stations that help us get around our cities. And for this, I think London has a fantastic new example. So let's take a look at it. If you enjoy this video and the work I do on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, you've probably heard of the Northern Line extension, and given the fact that the Northern Line is probably more accurately called the Northern Lines, you might actually be a bit confused what it is. Now, before the Northern Line extension, the Northern Line, or Northern Lines as it were effectively two separate lines which came together at Camden Town and Kennington, north and south of central London. The two different lines which compose the Northern Line are often referred to as branches, even though these are effectively completely separate lines, and they're named based on the major station hub that they connect to in the city centre. In the case of the Western Branch, Charing Cross, and in the case of the Eastern Branch, Bank. The Northern Line extension is really an extension of the version of the Northern Line that goes through Charing Cross, and instead of now having trains turn around at the Loop, which is present at Kennington, trains continue south-southwest to Battersea. Now, a lot of attention has been given to the Northern Line extension, given it's the first major tube extension in years, as well as the fact that the new areas around 9 Elms Lane and Battersea Power Station are absolutely booming with new high-rise development. At the same time, this development is exactly what funded the new extension of the Northern Line. There's also incredibly important equity and urban planning considerations that have to do with the incredibly expensive and often inaccessible real estate and housing that exists along this extension. But there is something that I don't think has gotten nearly enough attention, and that's the actual design of the stations on the Northern Line extension, particularly 9 Elms, which I think is absolutely fantastic. That's not to say that 9 Elms is a perfect station. It's only got one entrance and it isn't an interchange, so it doesn't have to serve that many passengers. But in many ways, I think 9 Elms is a great example of what should be the model for a modern subway station, the majority of which probably do just serve standard neighborhoods and aren't necessarily major interchange hubs. On surface level, the station isn't necessarily too unusual. You have a narrow street to the side of the station and a slightly larger one in front of it, with wayfinding signage and lots of pleasant bike racks. You also have really nice landscaping as well as hardscaping, or the hard surfaces used around the station in things like paving, which I think are much higher quality than the typical pure concrete or asphalt that you still often see around stations here in North America. You also have lots of bollards, which I'll just generally say are used all over the place in London, and they provide a lot of security from large vehicles or cars that you don't necessarily feel in North America, which can make walking down a busy street feel a bit stressful. The station itself is attractive and clean in its design. It provides a canopy from the often cold and wet London weather, but it isn't a bombastic display of starchitect prowess. And quite nicely, the back of house space, things like utility and service rooms, seem to be mainly kept above ground. In a lot of other subway stations we've seen around the world constructed in recent years, this space has been expensively put below the surface, causing stations to become more complex and much more expensive. At the same time, the entrance itself is really nice. It's wide, accessible, and open on 3 sides, providing lots of airflow and wide open sightlines. Despite the fact that I said this wasn't necessarily a high-capacity station, when you enter the station head house, which is often the name you give for this type of structure that's used to enter a station, you'll notice that there actually are a lot of fare gates and ticket machines. There are also 2 accessible fare gates, which I think is a nice touch. Far too often, accessible features in a station aren't redundant. If you have a single point of failure, like an elevator or an accessible fare gate that fails in your station, it can suddenly become inaccessible, and that's not the case with standard equipment. There's usually plenty of non-accessible fare gates, and if an escalator fails and you're able-bodied, you can still walk up or down it. Helping to build in these redundancies, especially where they can be done cost-effectively, is a good way of hardening your station, so that even when it doesn't work at peak performance, it still works. Another element I really like about the head house of the station is that the ceiling is really tall. I don't think this adds a ton to cost, but it does make it feel less claustrophobic and more open and airy. I also do like the modern, large-screen digital ticket machines you see in London. Ticket machines are one of those things that often don't get enough appreciation, but people have to spend time on them fairly frequently in many cities. And so they should have a very good user experience, especially in a city as large as London, where you're inevitably going to have thousands upon thousands of these machines scattered across the city. What's also nice is that there are plenty of screens within the head house to tell you when the next train or bus on an adjacent line is coming, so you know if you need to rush downstairs or if you can take it slower. What's also nice is that there are actual places to sit within the station, with benches placed within the head house itself, meaning that you're actually out of the weather if you need to wait for a bus, friends, or family. There's also a room which is accessible to employees for breaks or for passengers to just walk up and ask questions, which doesn't jet into the space, but which does provide a comfortable place for employees to wait separate from passengers. Heading through the fare gates, you actually also get a washroom, which doubles as a place for parents to tend to their infants. So many stations could benefit from a publicly accessible washroom like this. It doesn't have to be a large facility that's complicated, and in a facility as large as a station like this, you can definitely afford to keep it clean and well maintained, and it massively improves the accessibility of your system. Taking the escalators down, the station has the tube standard of 3 parallel escalators, which allow one to fail while 2 remain in service, as well as to provide 2 escalators in the peak travel direction if necessary. You'll also notice though that in this station, the high ceilings again give you an open and airy feeling that doesn't feel so subterranean. I also really appreciate the lighting that these modern escalators have right where your feet go, because it means you can easily see the steps on the escalator and are less likely to trip, which could be a serious safety hazard when you have escalators that are even this long, and these escalators aren't that long for a tube station. Now what's quite cool about 9 Elms is that as you go underground, there are actually these windows that allow you to see the underground structure of the station, composed of beams and pillars which hold up the space around the platforms and the central circulation area. These high ceilings and transparency effects make the space feel really wide open, even though it is underground. At platform level, the station is really nice. You have tons of space and also tons of seating, which is good because the frequencies on the Northern Line extension being every 10 minutes aren't exactly great for a metro. That said, there is lots of light in this underground space, and the columns are nicely spaced so that you can easily see from one end of the station to the other. The columns are also placed far enough back from the platforms that they nicely demarcate the central circulation and waiting space from the actual platforms themselves, and they provide place to put these giant roundels which make it easy to tell what station you're at even when you're on a train. You can also see that there are ads throughout the station, but they're never in your face or excessive, which I like. The station also has provisions for the future. It's prepared for platform screen doors so that when the signaling on the Northern Line is upgraded, that feature can be added. And as you can see from the cladding that goes above where the future platform screen doors will go, the reflective mirror-like finish gives you the same feeling as an infinity mirror, making the structural beams and columns look like they go on forever, which is actually a really cool architectural effect that I imagine doesn't even cost that much. At the center of the platform space, you have everyone's favorite bin bags, but you also have a nice information panel, which is lit and provides information on both sides, meaning you don't have to crowd around it like you do in so many other maps that are just plonked onto a random wall somewhere on a platform or on some connecting tunnel. Now, the next train screens aren't anything exuberant with LCD screens or projectors, but they're bright and really visible, which is nice. You can see when the next trains are coming, where they're actually headed to, and what time it currently is. And this is the essential information that you want to see on such a screen. With all of these things that 9 Elms has, I think the most notable thing about this station for me is what it doesn't have. The station doesn't have 3 entrances providing underground access across a street that you could just cross on your feet because it's pedestrian oriented. It also doesn't provide space for giant 200-meter trains. In fact, the platforms here are closer to 100 meters long, and I think that's a really important thing to remember. Most subway stations do not need to accommodate super giant trains, as London shows. Busy trains and busy stations aren't a bad thing. They just mean that you've right-sized your infrastructure. Lots of people are using it, and that means that you could spend money that you would have spent to build unnecessary extra space to just provide more people access to transit. At the same time, you'll notice 9 Elms doesn't have an intermediate concourse or mezzanine level for extra circulation, and this means that the underground facilities are kept to a minimum. All of this means that 9 Elms provides the necessary amenities you'd want in a station in a pleasant environment with full accessibility, but all at a reasonable price. The station has what it needs and nothing more, and that's how we should think about subway stations more often. Thanks for watching. you.